everybody. Welcome into Conversations with Authors and welcome back to Book Passage. Today we bring to you Jeremy Denk, author of Every Good Boy Does Fine. Well, Mic looks good. Okay. Before we get to both of our speakers properly, please allow me to welcome you to Book Passage's Conversations with Authors series. If you've seen one of these events before, well then welcome back. We're happy to see you again. But if you're new here, then Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area, both Corte Madera and the San Francisco Ferry Building. And we host and run book talks just like these very often, both in person and online throughout the week. As we're now streaming on YouTube and will continue to do so in the future, please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button just below this video. It's the big red one. It's completely free to you and honestly helps us out a lot. And as an added bonus, if you click that little bell next to the subscribe button, you'll be alerted every time we go live with one of these talks, so you don't have to miss out on something you otherwise might have really enjoyed. You can check out our upcoming events or check out our email newsletter if you'd like at bookpassage.com. And if you'd like to check out our speaker's book tonight, which is called Every Good Boy Does Fine, one more time, you can find it using the first link in the description below or again at bookpassage.com. Finally, and this is very important, if you have any questions tonight, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat just to the right of the screen or just below the screen, depending on where you're looking. It is your only way to get the questions to the speakers tonight, so please do not miss your chance to do it. Now allow me to introduce both of our authors tonight. First off, Jeremy Denk is one of America's foremost pianists. Winner of the MacArthur Genius Fellowship and the Avery Fisher Prize. Denk is the member of the American Academy Arts and Sciences. He returns frequently to Carnegie Hall and has recently appeared with ensembles including the Chicago Symphony, the New York Philharmonic, the Los Angeles Philharmonic. His recordings have reached #1 on the Billboard Classics chart and have been featured on many of the best of years lists. His writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The New Republic, The Guardian, New York Times Book Review. He is a graduate of Oberlin College, Indiana University, Juilliard School, and he lives in New York City. In conversation tonight, we have Jake Heggie, who is the composer of the operas Dead Man Walking, Moby Dick, It's a Wonderful Life, If I Were You, Great Scott, 3 Decembers, and 2 Remain, among others. He's composed nearly 300 songs, as well as chamber, choral, and orchestral works. The operas, mostly created with Gene Shear or the late Terrence McNally, have been produced on 5 continents. You can actually catch him with Jamie Barton at a recital on April 3rd at Cal Performances in Berkeley, if you are so inclined. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. I'm very glad to see an audience here tonight. Please allow me to turn it over to both of our speakers. Welcome.
Thank you, Nick. It's good to be here. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Jake. It's great that you're here. Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, it is my pleasure. It has been a long time. Jeremy and I first met over 20 years ago when I wrote a mini piano concerto. You were a teenager, probably, and and on the verge of an amazing career, which you have traced all over the world. And I wrote a mini piano concerto for you that you did with the EOS Orchestra in New York. And I just remember being blown away, not only by your playing, but your personality and how collaborative and open and eager and articulate you were. And that is borne out in this amazing, wonderful book that I only received a few days ago. So I've been pouring through it, but I'm not done with it yet. So congratulations on the book and congratulations on all the triumphs in your career and your life so far.
Thank you, Jake. I'm sorry we haven't been more in touch over there, but I remember having a great deal of fun playing your piece. Cut Time is what it was called, right?
Right, very good.
Yeah. And it had a lot of really fun licks in it. I remember running up and down the keyboard kind of madly. Yeah.
But I also love that you always were interested in, like, what if I do this here? What if I do that there? And that's my favorite kind of collaboration. And it's the kind of musician you are. So where are you right now, Jeremy?
I'm in my New York apartment, which is not as clean as it ought to be, but you can't really see any of it right now. I was in Philadelphia last night playing some Bach, and I trained back home this morning.
Yeah, some Bach. Tell us about that. What was that some Bach?
I've been playing all kinds of places. The Well-Tempered Clavier of Bach, which is the first book of the 48 preludes and fugues, one in every major and minor key. So it's a good solid evening. It's 2 hours plus change of music. I think it's one of the hardest concerts that I've ever tried to do.
I can imagine. I mean, if Bach had never written anything but the Well-Tempered Clavier, he'd still be one of the greatest composers ever. And yet he wrote so much more, but it is this foundation that young pianists start with very often, with the C major prelude in book one. And you use it as sort of the foundation for a lot of your book, which I found fascinating. By the way, I'm just so curious to know how you came about writing this book. It's so personal. It's
yeah, it's very personal.
Its real title is "Every Good Boy Does Fine: A Love Story in Music Lessons." And so, I mean, why? Why did you want to write the book, and how did you come to it and shape it, and how long did it take you?
It took me a ridiculously long time, but it all happened because I had written one kind of humorous piece for the New Yorker about recording, and it was a kind of a satirical account of what kind of neuroses I went through trying to record just one piece by Charles Ives. And I guess it was a success with the readers, and they're like, well, what would you like to do next? And I was like, well, the next thing I'd like to write is a love letter basically to my teacher, George Sebek, who was an amazing Hungarian professor of piano and an amazing pianist and person. And they were like, well, we do a lot of profiles. We don't really want to do that exactly. And I said, well, what if I do it like my teacher when I was 12 and my teacher when I was 22, and we do it a kind of a story of piano lessons, and they like that better. So they let me write that piece. And that piece got even more readers because I guess a lot of people associate A, with the trauma of piano lessons, but also B, with the kind of like problems of mentorship. We all deal with these, people who are trying to bring us to the next level, and these relationships can be very complicated. So that's how this book got born, really. After that, I got signed for the deal, and then I was like, well, how do I write about piano lessons in a way that's not the most boring thing ever?
And so, so how long ago did this journey start for you?
The book? Maybe 2013, 14.
Oh, so
it's a long
journey.
I mean, it was originally due in 2017. So to all you would-be authors, there is a way to postpone these deadlines. Don't tell your editor I said that, but
you're lucky in the book world with that. Like in concert world, we can't do that, right? You have to be ready for the concert. And writing an opera in your 3 years out, you don't get to postpone it.
Oh no, you're dead in the water. You absolutely are. Yes, you know all about that.
Yeah, and you do too. From showing. I think that's something too that people forget about with music is it requires showing up constantly. No one can learn your music for you. No one can internalize it. No one can perform it for you. You have to do all of that work. And it's the same with writing your book. You got to show up and do it. But it's got to be right. So taking your time sounds really good.
I mean, I think it's fair to say, a lot of those early years, concerts just took priority, right? I was stressed about various things. I had a lot of opportunities, that were coming up, and I took them. And so, the book was like, and I wrote little bits. I started writing them, and I was like, "Is this any good?" I'd send it into my editor, and he's like, "Well, it's it's something." And then I would get distracted. So. But the pandemic really helped, of course, in a way, for me to have focus time.
Oh, so it actually helped you in that regard.
It helped with the book for sure. Yeah.
Because all the concerts were postponed or canceled, right?
Yeah, and then I just wrote every day for many hours, and that a lot of problems got solved really fast.
It's interesting because music is so much about being alone, and in your head, it's a lot of alone time. So suddenly having the opportunity to dive into your book, that must have been very, very special instead of juggling it with all the performance.
It was very special. And maybe you have this experience too, that it was a lot of these lesson memories especially from the youngest years, but sometimes even in college, they have a really emotional quality. They make, like when you go visit your parents and you start to act like a 12-year-old again. When I started to revisit some of these piano lessons, I started to play like that, it started to come back. So I could only really access some of the really darkest and most embarrassing memories when I didn't have any concerts to play. I found it.
Interesting. So much of music, especially when you're young, is not only building technique, but finding authenticity, in who you are and how the music resonates for you rather than imitating your heroes. And so actually, when I saw that this was a parallel journey of your music lessons and a coming out story, it totally made sense to me, because it is a lifelong journey of self-discovery. But as an artist, as a musician, you have to get there sometimes a lot earlier, and it can be very, very challenging, especially when there's so much thrown at you, and so much is expected of you, and the pressure on yourself to stand out, to conform, all of these conflicting things. So how did you find your way in terms of marrying the very personal journey of the piano lessons with the struggle for authenticity in your own life? Because there is so much alone time and there is so much struggle. So, it's interesting to me that you wrote this book, because music is also so much about architecture and shaping. And you had to figure out a new way to create architecture and shape with this book. So that's a lot of questions all at once. But, what about the personal journey of the technique, the teachers, and tell us something about, your teachers and your journey with them, and how that was part of your coming out as an individual, as a gay man, as an artist that went on to have a career, because it's also precarious.
It is. It's very precarious. Let me grab onto one end of that and then see if I can get into some of the others, and then you can remind me what I've forgotten. I hope. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started with little neighborhood teachers, Mona Schneiderman down the street in New Jersey, who was the sweetest neighborhood teacher. And then after like 6 months, she was like, I can't handle this kid. He's got to have a really serious teacher. So I went to a wonderful woman, Lillian Livingston, who was really powerful, kind of personality. And she made me cry more or less every lesson.
Really?
My main memory is sort of crying either before or after that I couldn't satisfy her. I think a lot of the early part of the book is I was a kind of a perfectionist kid who was always told that he was very gifted at more or less everything except for gym. I was very good at math. I was very good at English. And then there was the piano. And so any failure was a kind of a mortal wound for me. You know what I mean? So criticism was really. Yeah, and that whole fraught part of myself, and I'm sure some of those early traumas, and the teachers, of course, being so well-meaning, right? They were after, right? Everyone's in a way after your well-being,
right? And these early teachers are generally very kind, even though they can be very strict.
I think Mona was very kind for the most part. A lot of our work was just like flashcards and learning the notes and stuff, and But once I got to Lillian really wanted to teach us classical phrasing, how to play a phrase of Mozart's that doesn't sound lumpy and terrible, basically, and my sense of elegance was basically the Love Boat at that point, right? That was, so she's trying to teach me all of that. And I still have the music where she wrote in all these things, trying to, but, it was her. I definitely felt continuous disappointment towards her. Yeah. And then when we moved to New Mexico, I had a different, he was the professor at New Mexico State. He never had a child student before. So he's kind of learning how to teach me while I'm kind of learning how to learn from him. He was very detail oriented and very focused on technique and discipline, but then he constantly said to me, I don't want to, the one thing I don't want to do is ruin your love for music. You just love music so much, I want to make sure. Then he would assign me some miserable like scale passage to practice, So he was full of contradictions too.
Yeah.
And I think, I hope the book does capture some of that element of.
Oh, definitely. You're very
Yeah.
articulate about that. How did you find the motivation to keep going regardless of the disappointments? Did you take the disappointments and the feeling of failure as a challenge, or who kept you going?
I don't know. I think, first of all, by the time I was 9 or so, I write about this in the book. My parents suggested, that, well, if I wasn't going to practice, why don't you just cancel piano lessons? We'll be done with it. And at that moment, I realized that it was impossible to imagine life without playing the piano. Yeah. Like it was the worst imaginable outcome. Like there was nothing they could have told me that would have been. So I think there was that, like it was already welded into my, but there's also just like, and they keep coming in, right? In my early teen years, I keep discovering all this music and I'm like, what the hell? This is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante or Beethoven Lay Quartet, it's like, holy crap, and there's so much of it, and that kept me practicing, that's the wonders of the music and its humanity and yeah.
I was thinking, I've been asked this question a lot because I was very solitary and inward as a kid. And they said, well, who were your mentors? And I said, in addition to my piano teachers, I was good friends with Chopin and Beethoven and Bach, and they kept teaching me things. And I think that's central to continuing. And I feel like that is true to this day. I have all of those friends walking through every doorway with me. And it sounds like that was a big part of your impetus as well, finding out more and more about life through these amazing notes on the page and what through their blood, sweat, and tears. Your teacher in Albuquerque, you include drawings that he put. I mean, not in Albuquerque, in
Las Cruces.
Las Cruces, right? He drew in your scores, right? What kinds of things was he trying to convey to you with the drawings and the scores?
That notebook is really kind of the origin of this whole thing, but in another way, right? But a lot of piano teachers gave you little stars for how you played, right? And he didn't like the little paste-on stars, so he drew them. And if I played well, they'd be kind of shiny, or like Superman. There was a Superman star, the star with a little extra cap, for particularly elegant phrasing or remembering to play a flat or whatever. But then, sometimes I came in and I've forgotten something essential, and so there would be a star with like one broken leg and a crutch, so like standing there looking at forlorn. And then there was there were stars that were just slumped over on their side. Sometimes there were moons, which were very ambiguous. And if I really played terribly, he drew a slug one time, and he drew a centipede, a really like hairy, ugly looking centipede.
Oh God.
Yeah.
And did you have support at home from your family through all of this, or was that challenging? Did they get it?
I guess that's one of the themes of the early part of the book is I hear from so many, and maybe you do too, I hear from so many young musicians or parents, especially parents of young musicians, who have no idea how much to push their kids, in what direction to push their kids, how much to encourage their love of music. Are they good enough? A lot of times parents don't know, of course, like they don't have a really solid way to gauge how talented their children are in the realm of music. They want them to enjoy it. They want them to be happy. They don't want them to pursue something impossible, but they don't want to, So, and I carefully try to calibrate. My parents were they were children of the Depression. They had very complicated origin stories, and they were very worried about music as a profession, and they didn't really want to believe in it that way. But then they kind of had to, and they were constantly conflicted between encouragement and regret, which had a very complicated relationship, to me,
which is why it's so great you had not only these wonderful teachers who challenged you, but also the music itself. because I mean, you're incredibly brilliant and smart, Jeremy. I'm kind of in awe of your brain, and the fact that you not only articulate so beautifully at the keyboard, but now you found a way to articulate that in words is really inspiring. So you had these teachers as a kid, and then as a teenager, and then you went to college really young.
I did, because that's part of the story too. It's the sort of gifted and talented program, and then there were all kinds of social consequences to being a hyper, productive young kid.
Because were you 15, 16?
Barely 16 when I arrived at Oberlin, and that was very hard, especially the first year. I could barely. I mean, I had no social life except for our little band of classical nerds in Las Cruces, right? And to sort of cope with Oberlin level of savvy, and that took a long time to sort out. And maybe that's part of the reason that a lot of other social things, like realizing I was gay or whatever, among many other things, that got. And also obviously there was a little plague that was happening at the same time that may have complicated my whole process there.
Yeah.
But a lot of Oberlin was just also trying to become a person, and I guess another hopefully theme that runs through the book that is the way that music connects you to humanity, but also takes you away from it, and how incompetent of a person I was in so many ways, because I was constantly thinking about music and the piano, and just devoted in a way that stunted lots of other parts of my life.
Yeah. And so you also, I haven't finished the book yet, but you talk about a lot of landmarks and landmines that everyone has in their life, but in particular, like one landmark was your father, listening with your father to the Saint-Saëns organ symphony and hearing that massive chord. But these other landmarks towards becoming and finding your own identity, not only as a great artist, but as an individual, they're not easy to do when you're required to practice and work as hard as you are as a solo pianist aspiring. So moving forward from Oberlin, what was a defining moment for you in terms of finding that connection between you, the individual on the planet, and you, the artist, who's been working so hard and alone in a practice room?
Well, I think a couple things happened. When I went to grad school and started studying with Shebuk,
I was at Indiana University.
Right? I was in Bloomington, Indiana, and suddenly the frantic pace of my educational journey slowed. I had no desire to finish any degrees. All I wanted to do was be there in Bloomington, practice, coach opera, which I did, and just be around my musician friends, and there I began to kind of breathe out as a person.
And how old were you then? How old were you?
Well, I went there when I was 20, and I stayed as a student till I was 25. My dad was furious. He's like, "You should be moving on with your life." It's like, and in a way he was right, that I was then a little bit late to pursue certain career options in New York or whatever. But I managed,
And so that landmark of being at IU in beautiful Bloomington on that gorgeous campus with your friends, was that key to finding the next step for you? Did you need those 5 years? I mean, against your father's wishes?
I feel that I did. I think by the last year, it was beginning to lose its, as amazing as Shebuk was and is, as a musical thinker. And that's another hopefully theme of the book. These mentors come into your life, you take in what you must from them, and then but there is an expiration date, right, to these relationships. You have to kind of, because I idolized Shebuk. I probably loved Shebuk as much as I've loved any human being in a certain way, and I hope that's evident in the way that I write about him and the way that he plays. Like certain phrases. it broke my heart to cut some lessons from the book, that he gave me. I tried to put down as much of his, wisdom in the book, um, and so yeah, it was like in a way, almost a romantic, platonic romantic relationship that became too deep, and then I had to.
Boy, do we have a conversation to have later on?
Oh,
I don't
yes?
know my story because I went to no, because I studied with Joanna Harris at UCLA,
right.
and talk about a relationship that got too deep. We even got married when I was 21, and she was 70. So yeah.
Right. I knew that about you, but I pushed it aside or somehow. Yeah. That's
so
amazing.
I understand deeply what you are talking about.
Wow. Yeah.
And there's an awkward IU connection to that whole story as well.
Uh-huh.
But it's so interesting hearing you talk about Shivak in this way, and that it was time to move on and look for a new mentor. And you had that instinct in you that it was time to move on. So where did you go after that, after you'd had this wonderful foundation these 5 years? And did you find another mentor, or were you able then to be your own mentor at that point?
I had a wonderful teacher in Juilliard who was the diametric opposite of Shevak,
Yeah.
In every sense, Shevak was all the spiritual immensities and elegance and taste, and, Herbert, smoked cigars in his studio and, ate bagels and just generally groused at you, in a way that was, very New York, The thing about Herbert, which I also hope I captured in the book, he'd heard so many pianists, fuck up so many passages over his 50 years at Juilliard, So, he knew easy solutions that would work for anyone to make something sound less bad. Whereas Shevak would be trying to reinvent the wheel, kind of, solve the whole question of grammar and stuff. Stetson was like, just do that later. And he's like, and he fixed things really fast. And so actually he turned out to be a very useful foil to Shevak in many ways.
Uh-huh.
And funny.
And what kind of rep were you working on by that point? Because, I mean, you were working on very challenging rep from a very young age, and who gave you the Appassionata? You were, a kid, right?
Well, I was 16 when I took on the Appassionata, which is, I think, too young. But a lot of, you hear a lot of 13-year-olds these days playing the Appassionata. So,
and so what kind of rep were you in when you got to Juilliard? Is this when you started to really adventure out, or had you already ventured way out from the standard rep?
I was starting to play pieces that I loved, that were of interest to me. And they were odd. I played for my New York debut, I played the Bach Toccata, the E minor, which is a pretty intense and abstruse piece of Bach. And then I played the Elliott Carter Piano Sonata. I don't know if you ever played that piece.
No.
That was a big party piece of mine for a while. And I played, and I loved this Schubert D major sonata, which has got all this bittersweet Viennese, almost kind of Mahler-like stuff in it. So we worked on all that repertoire. Basically, though, by then, and maybe I under talk about this, but it was me looking at pieces and like, which pieces really are speaking to me at this moment. I was making my own choices of who I was as far as what pieces I was playing, which is so important for young musicians.
Yeah, it's about finding, again, your authentic identity, what resonates for you, where you can actually give it the right voice.
Yeah.
So in terms of, but then you were giving all these composers voice, but had you found your own personal voice yet, or when did that start to emerge strongly?
Well, yeah, it wasn't until it's very funny. My whole coming out story happened more or less in the context of doing my doctoral dissertation. And I thought that story was quite funny so I put it in the book about I'm in the middle of working on this doctoral dissertation and that I'm exhausted and this guy calls me, he's like, come out to Brooklyn. And I ended up, just sort of randomly spending the night with him at his place, which never happened again. But I knew in the morning when I woke up in his bed that was that. and I had a taxi home through New York, and I saw this tenderness through the city, which I'd never seen before, and I was all in raptures, and and also at that same time I'd forgotten that I had a lesson with one of the world's most famous pianists, Mitsuko Uchida, like a few hours later. So I had to get home and clean myself up and brush my teeth and try to forget this, rite of sexual awakening that I'd just been through, and then go play Bach for one of my idols.
And did Bach feel different all of a sudden?
I barely remember the Bach. I'm pretty sure it was not that great that day. But I heard some Schumann at a concert later that day, and it had a very profound, because Richard Good played some Schumann, and he did this little rubato in a little phrase. And I'm sitting there, kind of half asleep, but also in this ecstasy, right? And like in this self-discovery moment. And I'm sitting in this, the 92nd Street Y, and I hear this little rubato. I'm like, that little pause that he did before that note, that was true beauty. Like that, you felt the moment of the note, the identity of the note, and there was something about, and that was the same tenderness, that I'd felt all through the city, in the morning. So I had this kind of religious, whatever, ecstasy in relation to music that had a very funny and odd bouncing off, life. I guess, it's funny the ways that you can't really time these musical revelations, and they often come at inopportune moments.
Hey, as long as they show up, right?
Yeah. True enough.
But so, I mean, that was another landmark, this sexual awakening, this romantic awakening, this looking at the world differently. Do you feel like then you approached music in a new way as well, that has stayed with you to this day?
I would say probably around then I began to feel, and whether that's coincidence or sort of all an organic connection, I think I began to feel confident as a pianist in a way. I think physically a lot of things I'd learned began to coalesce, and I began to have a way of playing, that was, and, I just also felt happier.
Yeah. Makes a difference, right? I was going to say, there's so much alone time, writing, being a pianist, being a young artist, practicing, developing technique. And then, you still have to find a balance today with that alone time, because you're traveling a lot, you are on the road, you are having to keep several recital programs together, concerti, chamber music, all of this stuff, plus you're teaching. How do you find the balance between protecting yourself and living your full life and all of this alone time and travel, that, once you had that romantic awakening and emergence that changed everything, you still had to find this balance, which I'm sure being a solo pianist is just so mind-blowing to me. I don't know how you do it. And so how do you find this balance to be a human being and have this amazing career?
I'm not sure that I have. It comes at times, honestly, and it's a terrible thing to say, but for me, the pandemic was a very welcome aspect in some ways, because I'm the sort of person who doesn't take a vacation, and even when you desperately need one, and it forced me to sit and take the time and breathe out. So I think the balance is I don't know how you find balance. You always seem to me, when I've seen you, to be a very, very balanced individual. I have rituals, I have exercise. Exercise is very important. Cooking. But also being a social being. I tend to have this slight weakness that I inherited from my father of cloistering away. But obviously socializing is so important to being a musician, not only just in terms of being healthy and happy, but also, building a career is a lot about, relationships and music, right? So much. Yeah.
So what, now that you're at this point in your life, what advice would you give to your younger self if you could? Say you're talking to your younger self before you even went to Oberlin. What advice, based on the perspective of this book, of this life that you've lived, would you give your younger self?
Yeah, I think I would say to my younger self, which is a perennial problem, and I think it's a perennial problem for a lot of young pianists that I encounter, you're in the lesson, you're desperate to be praised and to feel that you're on the right course, or, that you've practiced enough, or that you have talent or whatever. And we all need that, right? To some extent, but that desperate need for approval often made it impossible for me to listen. It was very hard for me to receive criticism and praise at the same time. And I often remind myself when I'm teaching, I always tell the student, and quite honestly, this was great, and this I really liked, this and that, but, and I think a lot of students only hear the but.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the book where at the end, which is one of my favorites, which is my ill-fated first summer and last summer at summer music camp, when my parents sent me off to North Carolina, and among other things, I decided I didn't really have to shower at all for in 9 weeks in North Carolina in July or whatever. But at the end of the summer, I played in a master class, and I didn't really practice, which is, of course, a problem. But I was so excited to be around other kids and to have sort of a normal social life that, it just seemed beside the point in a certain way, right? But this guy gave me a class, and he had my number right away. He knew that I could sight read anything really fast, and therefore I wouldn't necessarily do the hard foundational work that was necessary to make the piece come to the next level. And there's the problem. And he's like, you're going to be suffering from this problem your whole life, and you have to address it. And all I heard was, you suck, right? And
yeah.
I had my first sort of semi-gay experience a few days before that. That all collides in that scene in a kind of hopefully fun way.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm sure you're an amazing role model for young pianists and students who are lucky enough to work with you. I wish I'd had someone like you to work with when I was a kid, because it was rough. It was really rough. But I wanted to go back to something. We have a lot of common threads, which when we get together and have a bottle of wine, we're going to go over. But another one is the Classical Barbara album.
The Barbra Streisand.
The Barbra Streisand Classical Barbara album, which was so transformative for me, because I knew nothing about that music. I was studying piano. And then all of a sudden, and Barbara, I loved Barbara. She was like my first goddess, her and Julie Andrews, because of those movies. But that album was really enlightening for me. My family didn't get it. They weren't classical at all. At least your family had some connection to classical music. But how did you come across, Classical Barbara? And were you aware of other pop influences in that time? And do you still enjoy, pop music and the other kinds of music out there? And do you go to concerts? But start with Classical Barbara.
Well, Barbara, mostly I knew Barbara through the Christmas album. That's where I encountered Gounod's Ave Maria, which is the Bach First Prelude.
Right.
And my mom and dad always argue, because mom hated that album. She's like, Joe, it sounds like she's on coke, and then dad would be like, but he loved Barbra Streisand actually in a certain way. He had kind of a crush on her maybe, or something, some sort of like, former Catholic monk, loves Jewish,
That's right. Your dad was
there was some weird thing going on. And so they often argued that that's an amazing performance of that piece, with the backup chorus and the way she belts out the top note. And, there's a certain shamelessness to it, right? And but an absolutely fierce devotion to the musical material, you know.
And were you exposed to other pop culture of the time, or did you try to avoid it? Or, I mean, because certainly in school, your friends would have been clued into it.
Yeah, it's a great regret of mine in a certain way. But I knew John Denver, I knew Olivia Newton-John, Peter, Paul and Mary. Those were my parents' pop albums or whatever, right? And other than that, I only listened to classical, and I only liked what you call classical music, right? Really. And I've luckily managed to really come to love a lot of great, for example, jazz performers, and some more recent things, but I have trouble. I don't think I ever developed the listening muscles. Do you know what I mean? That it takes to. I often don't even understand what the pitches are in pops. I often ask my friends, like, what key is this in? I have just no idea what's going on. It's really humiliating, you know. I can analyze, Tristan and Isolde till the cows come home, right? But I can't even figure out one Britney Spears tune, It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, you landed where you were supposed to be. But I think there were a couple of questions. Is there anything that you want to throw out there?
Let's go to questions, Jake. I'm loving that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You're. Thank you for just having a lovely conversation. It makes me more excited to keep reading your book. So Elizabeth Eshelman has asked, can you talk a little bit about some of your writing models as you were working on the book? Who did you read that impacted your style and structure?
I had very little faith about this project at the beginning, and then I wrote one scene. I started writing all these very hyper emotional college memories scenes. I was like, no. Then I wrote one scene, the scene with Norman Fisher, where I'm having a chamber music coaching and he hugs me, and that scene had a resonance for me. And I was like, oh, I can write that. And I was like, maybe I can organize the whole book around that. But then I was like, okay, I did that. That's great. I know how to write this book now. And then I left it for like 3 years or something. Maybe not 3 years, but a long time, right? And then I ran across this book by Brian Blanchfield, who's a wonderful, gay poet and essayist. It's called Proxies. It's kind of a pain in the ass of a book. They're little essays in the style of Montaigne, and they seem to be very dry essays, right, about academic things. And then suddenly in the middle of each one, it turns on a dime to this really personal, unbelievable stories of growing up gay, basically in the Deep South, and that I was like, oh, I can do that. I think I know how to do that. And I started writing some of the other things, So, and then we developed the concept that, I really wanted to write some things about, like in the old blog way, about music generally, funny things, weird, irreverent things. So I was like, okay, it's got to be, a memoir interlaced with sort of semi-essays or something, like lessons I'm giving to the reader. That came about a couple of years into the process, but then I didn't really write most of the essays until the pandemic. I wrote a couple of things, but anyway, so I looked at a lot of models of great, like there's this great pianist memoir called Notes of a Pianist by Louis Moreau Gottschalk, which I recommend to everyone. I was like, yeah, that's amazing. I didn't live that life, I can't do that. I can't tell you what it was like to play in America during the Civil War or to meet Brahms or whatever, So there were a lot of models that weren't that useful.
Yeah. But you are a voracious reader. I want to alert everyone, there's a wonderful Q&A with you in the New York Times about all the books that have influenced you, what you've been reading, what you're looking forward to read. It's very impressive. There's a question, actually. Amy Tan, the wonderful author, my good friend Amy. Hi, Amy Tan. She wants to ask, can I take lessons with you?
Of course, Amy.
She's a wonderful pianist. She works really hard at it.
We've met a bunch of times, but I didn't know that that would be an honor. That would be so exciting.
So
Yeah.
Amy, you're on. There you go. And Jeremy,
Yeah.
you're in the Bay Area every now and then, yes?
Yeah, I'm not there now, but I will. I'm doing it, all these book things here in the city for the moment. But in April and May, I will be in San Francisco a lot. So if you want to practice something, yeah.
Okay, Amy, I want to sit. I want to take. Okay, so Peter Nicholson asks, has writing always been a part of your artistic practice? You have a blog for a long time that seemed like an important place to process various experiences. So have you always been a writer?
It's very interesting. If this is the Peter Nicholson, he's also in the book at a crucial juncture.
Whoa.
Yeah. And he tried to convince me that I was gay when I was 17, and I wasn't having any of it. Tragically. Has writing always been, certainly reading? I don't know about you, Jake. I mean, for me, when I was a kid, there was music, of course, but books were the ultimate refuge. And it was something your parents never complained about,
Right.
If you were reading a book, they're like, oh yeah, that's great. Go ahead and read, and obviously I liked literature as an escape. I was a very neurotic kid. So I think when my friend Anya encouraged me to start blogging when I was, in my late 20s or whatever, it did also feel around that time that I got happier because I was using a part of myself that I'd never used.
Mm-hmm. It's like unfolding layers of your artistic journey and experience, from the horrible crushing technique lessons and, the drawings in in the book that your teacher made, to things that they wrote in your book. And I know how precious those are, to starting to write, to diving into literature and reading voraciously and connecting all of these things. I was so lucky with the teacher I had, Joanna Harris, who not only wanted me to learn the Chopin Ballade, but then to see what was going on in Chopin's life at the time. What was the literature? What was going on in the opera house? What was because you can tell Chopin went to the opera. I mean, come on.
Of course he did, yeah.
So Marty Krasny asks, what books, authors on music have been most important to you? And Peter Nicholson says that is the very Peter Nicholson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought so. It would have been a very unusual coincidence if it hadn't been.
So what books and authors have been most on music have been most important to you?
I'd like to ask you, Jake, that question when I'm done. I'd be curious because, a lot of people, love Charles Rosen's books, which are pretty wonky, but there's a lot to love in there too. He could be very funny.
1791, the last year of Mozart's life. That's another one. Just sidebar, because I'm going to forget. That's not Charles, but.
Yeah, I haven't read that book yet. I heard that was very good. I heard that was very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
And there's something about the Age of Enlightenment, the one about Bach meeting Frederick the Great, that I read recently, which was very engaging, and especially for sort of the more general, reader. Charles Rosen is a little bit more for the wonky reader, unfortunately. Schnabel's memoir is really great.
There's a book by my first composition teacher when I was 16, Ernest Bacon. It's called Notes on the Piano. That's really interesting from his perspective as a pianist and composer in that era. And there was another one that just sort of flipped off. The switch just flipped off. I'm sorry. But
I always, there's some things that are just almost too obvious to mention, but Leonard Bernstein, the Harvard lectures, The Unanswered Question, there's a lot of fun. He really knew how to, and I bring that book up in my book a little bit about making beautiful parallels between music and language. There's been big arguments on the Twitter recently about whether music is a universal language or not, and what an idiotic cliche that is, and all this stuff. And I think like all analogies, it's dangerous to put too much faith in them. but
Yeah.
but music has a lot of language-like elements, you know, and language has some very powerful music-like elements. So, and those things are always productive and beautiful to think about.
Right.
Yeah.
So now that you've written your book, it's out there. We're all getting our copies and reading and learning about your life and your arrival at this moment. What are you looking forward to now that we're through the pandemic? Your book is out. You know, that has to feel like an earth-changing moment for you after all that work. I mean, you've told us your life story to now. What are you really looking forward to next?
I'm looking forward to learning some new music that I've never really explored. Actually, I was just starting to work on a piece by Julius Eastman called Piano 2. And some really new, some pieces that younger composers have written for me.
Is that something you're interested in? Pieces that are being written for you? Is that happening a lot now?
Extremely. I feel very remiss that I haven't done that much of it in the last 10 years. But I'm determined to do. I do hope that I have a certain. I like taking new pieces and finding a way through them and into them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can't wait to hear what's next. I'm fascinated with the way you articulate your journey so clearly and to write about music so clearly, which I find incredibly difficult. So hard to describe music in words, and you're really good at this and making this parallel with your own life. So congratulations on everything, Jeremy. It's a real pleasure to have this conversation with you today.
Likewise, Jake. Thanks so much. Thanks for being here.
Well, hello. Yeah, so alrighty then. I was just hovering to see whenever you two wrapped it up. I'm glad I came in at a good time. Well, then, thank you to everybody that's in the audience. It was nice to see a good crowd, a couple of good friends and members of Book Passage and stuff like that. It was good to have everybody out there. One last time, the book is Every Good Boy Does Fine. You can purchase it at Book Passage. We'll ship it to your house just like any other online retailer. You can find that from the description in the very, very, very first link in the description just below this video. Additionally, if you would like to go see Jake, one more time, you can find him in recital with Jamie Barton on April 3rd at Cal Performances in Berkeley. I'm sure he'd love to see you all there.
Love it.
Yeah, and other than that, thank you one last time for coming out. We host talks just like these very often throughout the week, so if you'd like to come in, you can check us out at bookpassage.com. We have our event schedule coming up, and you can subscribe to the YouTube channel if you don't want to go to another website. But other than that, I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Thank you one last time, Jake. Thank you one last time, Jeremy, for being here. It really, really was a lovely conversation. Everybody in the chat over there was talking about how good of a time they had. So
good. I'm glad. I had a great time too. Thank you so much.
Me too.
Absolutely, everybody.
Ciao, everybody.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.